In a packed auditorium, a millionaire professor offers $15 million to anyone who can solve a complex equation. With a smirk, he points to a barefoot boy collecting recyclables, drawing laughter from the audience. But the boy walks onto the stage, picks up the chalk and masterfully solves the entire thing, stunning the crowd into silence. What was meant to be a humiliation becomes a legend, and the world discovers an invisible talent. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. The dawn crept slowly over New York City, bringing with it that damp chill that clings to the skin and makes the body shiver. Leo opened his eyes, the feeling of a dream still mixed with reality. He was lying on carefully folded pieces of cardboard under the awning of a commercial building near Columbia University. Beside him was the bag of recyclables he carried as if it were a part of his own body. Cans, plastic bottles, paper, all separated with an almost obsessive organization. He was 12 years old, but his eyes held a depth that didn't match his age. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something denser, as if every experience on the streets had carved a maturity into him that most people would take decades to achieve. Or perhaps never would. Leo got up slowly, brushed the dust from his worn-out pants, and carefully rolled up the cardboard. He would keep it right there behind some cardboard boxes the building's maintenance man let pile up. It was his spot. No one bothered him. The routine always began like this. Early. Before the city truly woke up, before the judgmental stares started to weigh on him, Leo walked through the still empty streets, observing everything. The illuminated storefronts, the towering buildings, the luxury cars parked along the curb. It all seemed so distant from his reality that sometimes he wondered if he wasn't living in two different worlds. One where he truly existed, and another where he was just an invisible shadow. But Leo didn't let it get him down, at least not completely. There was something in him that resisted, a flame that refused to be extinguished. Maybe it was the memory of his parents, maybe it was just stubbornness, or maybe it was something he couldn't quite explain, but that he felt pulsing in his chest every time he looked at a book, a magazine, anything that contained knowledge. He kept walking until he reached the nearest subway station. It was usually busy early in the morning, with people heading to work, people coming back from long nights. And where there were people, there was trash. Leo didn't like that word. Trash. To him, it was all opportunity. Every can was a coin, every plastic bottle was another step forward, and every discarded magazine or newspaper was a window to a world he devoured with his eyes. That's how it all started. A few years ago, when he was still trying to understand what it meant to live without his parents, Leo found a book thrown in a trash can near a bookstore. It was a little torn, with yellowed pages, but still readable. It was a science book, nothing too complex, aimed at kids. But for Leo it was like discovering treasure. He read that entire book in 2 days, under an overpass, lit only by the streetlights, and when he finished, he wanted more. Leo's parents were simple people. His father, Anthony, was a construction worker. His mother, Martha, was a housekeeper. They lived in a small house in the Bronx, a little wooden shack with a leaky roof when it rained. But it was theirs. It was home. Leo was different from an early age. His teachers noticed. He finished his assignments before everyone else. He asked complex questions. One of his teachers even called his parents in for a meeting. She said the boy had a rare potential, that he needed special encouragement. Anthony and Martha listened with shining eyes, but also with heavy hearts. They couldn't afford it. But they promised to do their best. They started buying used books at flea markets. They encouraged Leo to read, to study, to dream. And Leo dreamed. He dreamed of being a scientist, of discovering things. His parents believed in him. They said he was special. And Leo felt that it was true. He could understand things quickly, memorize information with ease. But life has its setbacks. Anthony had an accident on the job site. He was left disabled. The family fell into crisis. Martha started working more, coming home later and later, more and more tired. Leo, at just 9 years old, started to help. He collected cans after school, and then, in a cruel twist, Leo lost them both. Anthony first. Martha followed shortly after, consumed by grief and exhaustion. Leo was left alone. He had some distant relatives, but no one wanted to take responsibility. He ended up in an overcrowded group home. Leo couldn't stand it. He ran away. He preferred the streets. At least on the streets, he was free. Since then, he started searching. Discarded scientific journals from universities, old newspapers with special sections on health, technology, space. Leo read everything. He absorbed everything. And the most amazing part was that he understood. He didn't just understand, he memorized. Every formula, every concept, every explanation was etched into his mind as if it were a tattoo, a photographic memory, someone with technical knowledge would say if they observed him. But Leo didn't know that. He just knew he could remember everything he read. Columbia University became, without anyone planning it, his refuge. Not because he studied there, obviously, but because the university was a place full of events, symposiums, lectures, and where there were events there was trash to collect. But it wasn't just that. There were also the cleaning, staff, hard-working women with calloused hands and tired smiles, who looked at Leo and saw something more than a street kid. They saw a son, a grandson, someone who deserved care. Ms. Gloria was the first, an elderly woman with grey hair tied in a tight bun who had worked on the campus cleaning crew for over 20 years. She saw Leo collecting recyclables near the university cafeteria one afternoon and instead of shooing him away, offered him a container of food. Leo hesitated at first, afraid it was some kind of trap. But his hunger spoke louder. And when he ate that warm food made with a home-cooked touch, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Welcome. From then on, Ms. Gloria started saving meals for him. Whenever there were leftovers from the cafeteria, she'd set some aside, and Leo would show up, usually late in the afternoon, to pick it up. They didn't talk much. Ms. Gloria wasn't one for asking a lot of questions, but she noticed. She noticed the boy was different. She noticed the way he looked at the students going in and out of classrooms. She noticed the way he picked up discarded books and leafed through them carefully, as if they were made of glass. One day she asked if he knew how to read. Leo just nodded, so she brought him some old books she had at home from when her kids were little. Leo thanked her with a shy smile and disappeared. But he came back a week later and returned the books, all of them read. Ms. Gloria was impressed, and that's when she started bringing different things, more complex books, magazines, course packets that students left behind. There was someone else who noticed Leo. Jessica, a young woman who worked the night cleaning shift. She was only 22, but she carried the responsibility of supporting her sick mother on her shoulders. Jessica saw Leo sometimes, when he showed up late to get the meals Ms. Gloria left for him. She started talking to him, asked if he was okay, if he needed anything. Leo was reserved, but he slowly opened up to her. Jessica became a sort of big sister. She brought him clothes she didn't wear anymore, old sneakers that still fit. Leo accepted with gratitude but never asked for anything. He had his pride, a quiet but present pride. Leo devoured everything, math, physics, chemistry, biology, but it was pharmacokinetics that truly fascinated him. He found a dense, technical book full of formulas and graphs thrown in one of the dumpsters by the pharmacy department. He took it to his spot under the awning and started reading. At first it was hard. Many of the terms were new, but Leo didn't give up easily. He read, reread, made mental notes, made connections, and slowly it started to make sense. The absorption of drugs by the human body, the distribution, the metabolism, the elimination, it was like a giant puzzle he was putting together piece by piece. Today was a special day. Leo knew because he had seen the posters scattered around campus. The National Symposium on Clinical Pharmacology. It would be in the main auditorium with speakers from all over the country. And where there was an event of this size, there was a lot of recyclable trash. Leo planned to get there early, before the official cleaning crew started. That way he could collect the bottles and cans left behind without being bothered. He arrived on campus in the middle of the morning. The auditorium was empty, being prepared for the afternoon event. Leo entered through the back door, the one the cleaning crews used. He knew the way well. He started collecting the plastic bottles that were already scattered in the hallways, leftovers from previous events. He worked in silence, almost invisible. It was when he entered the main auditorium that something caught his attention. On the huge blackboard on the stage, someone had written an equation. Leo stopped. He dropped his bag of recyclables on the floor and walked closer, his eyes fixed on those letters and numbers. It was a pharmacokinetics equation. Complex, very complex. It involved elimination rate, volume of distribution, plasma concentration. It was exactly the kind of problem he had studied in that technical book he'd found months ago. And he knew the answer. He didn't need paper, he didn't need a calculator. Just by looking at that equation, Leo could visualize the entire solving process in his mind. He saw every step, every adjustment, every necessary simplification. It was as if the answer was right there, floating before his eyes, just waiting to be written down. He stood there, mesmerized. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Not because he was physically in that space, but because he understood it. He mastered it. In that moment, he wasn't a street kid. He was just someone who understood science. His fingers tingled with the urge to pick up the chalk, to solve that equation, to show that he knew. But who would listen to a dirty, barefoot boy? Who would believe he understood something so complex? No one. Leo knew that. So he just stood there, absorbing that moment of silent connection with knowledge. But the feeling was short-lived. The auditorium door burst open, and a man walked in with firm steps and a haughty posture. He wore an expensive, perfectly tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. His hair was slicked back, and his eyes had that gleam of someone used to being admired. Professor Marcus Thorne. Leo recognized him from the posters. He was the keynote speaker for the symposium, and he was also known for being extremely wealthy, the owner of several pharmaceutical patents. Marcus stopped when he saw Leo near the stage. He frowned. He looked at the bag of recyclables on the floor, at the boy's tattered clothes, at his bare feet. And then, with an impatient wave of his hand, he spoke in a harsh tone. "Get out of here, kid. This is no place for you." Leo didn't move right away. He looked one last time at the equation on the board, as if saying goodbye to something precious. Then, in silence, he picked up his bag and started walking toward the exit. But before he reached the door, he heard the professor's voice again, this time with a different tone. There was something there, an idea forming. "Wait." Leo stopped and turned. Around. Marcus was watching him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A calculated smile. "You come here to collect trash, don't you? You must know this auditorium pretty well." Leo just nodded, suspicious. "How about you stay for the symposium? There will be a lot of people, a lot of trash for you to collect afterward." The offer sounded strange, too generous to be true, but Leo didn't have much to lose. He nodded again. Marcus smiled more broadly now, but there was something cruel in that smile. Something Leo couldn't identify at that moment, but that he would feel on his own skin very soon. "You can sit over there in the corner, but stay quiet. Don't cause any trouble." Leo obeyed. He sat in a corner of the auditorium, hugging his bag of recyclables, and waited. Slowly, people started to arrive. Scientists, professors, graduate students, all well-dressed, carrying laptops and tablets, chatting in groups. No one looked at Leo, or rather some did, but they quickly looked away, as if the mere sight of a dirty, barefoot boy was too uncomfortable to process. The auditorium filled up, the lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the stage. Professor Marcus Thorne walked up with that same arrogant posture. He greeted the audience, made jokes that drew polite laughter, and began his lecture. He spoke about advances in pharmacokinetics, new drugs, the research he was leading. His voice was firm, full of authority. The audience listened with respectful attention. After all, Professor Thorne wasn't just a brilliant academic. He was also a successful businessman, owner of valuable patents. His name opened doors. Leo watched everything from his dark corner. He saw the students taking notes, the professors nodding in agreement, and he felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't envy. It was a mix of frustration and desire, a desire to be part of that world, frustration at knowing it was impossible, He had no certificates, no diplomas, no connections. He only had a mind that absorbed knowledge like a sponge. And then, in the middle of his presentation, Marcus stopped. He looked at the blackboard, where the equation was still written. He announced in a loud, theatrical voice that he had prepared a special challenge. Whoever could solve that equation right there and then would receive a generous sum. $100,000. The audience murmured, interested. Some laughed, thinking it was an intellectual provocation. Others began to analyze the equation. But no one stood up. It was difficult. It required not only theoretical knowledge, but also quick thinking, the ability to make mental adjustments. That's when Marcus did something that would change everything. He looked around as if searching for something. His eyes found Leo. A smile formed on his face. It wasn't kind. It was cruel and amused. He pointed at Leo and said, in a mocking tone, "Look over there, even that kid could give it a try. What do you say, kid? Want to try to win $100,000? The audience erupted in laughter. It wasn't necessarily malicious laughter. It was the laughter of people who found the idea absurd, ridiculous. Some students took pictures with their phones. Others whispered among themselves. Leo froze. He felt the weight of their stares. He felt the humiliation burning inside his chest. But along with the humiliation came something else. Anger. Not explosive anger, but the cold, calculated anger that drives you to prove everyone wrong. Anger at being treated like he was nothing. Anger at being invisible. Anger at having talent, having knowledge, but having no voice, no credibility, no chance. And it was in that moment, that exact moment of heavy silence and mocking stares, that Leo made the decision that would change not only his life, but the lives of many others who, like him, were invisible to the world. He stood up. The silence that fell over the auditorium lasted only a few seconds, but to Leo it felt like an eternity. He stood up slowly, feeling his legs tremble slightly. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from determination. He left his bag of cans on the floor in the corner, where he'd been sitting, and started walking toward the stage. Each step was firm despite his bare feet on the cold floor. Each step was a silent declaration that he would no longer be invisible. The laughter gradually died down. Some still thought it was a joke. Others started to feel uneasy. There was something in the boy's posture that didn't match the image they had of him. It wasn't the posture of someone who was about to humiliate himself further. It was the posture of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Professor Marcus Thorne watched from the podium with a smile that was beginning to falter. He had done it as a provocation, as a way to entertain the audience and reinforce his own status. He never imagined the boy would actually walk onto the stage. But now it was too late to back down. Everyone was watching. Cell phone cameras were recording. He would have to let the scene play out. Leo climbed the steps to the stage and stood before the blackboard. The equation was there, huge, complex, intimidating. But to him, it was like reading a familiar map. Every term made sense. Every variable had its place. He picked up the piece of chalk from the holder and without hesitation began to write. First, he rearranged the terms of the original equation. His fingers moved with precision. His handwriting wasn't neat, but it was legible. Leo muttered softly as he wrote, as if explaining each step to himself. In reality, he was just staying focused, preventing the weight of the stairs from distracting him. The audience was silent now. A different kind of silence than before. It was no longer a mocking silence, it was a silence of disbelief, of astonishment, because what that boy was doing on the board made sense, complete sense. He wasn't just scribbling random numbers, he was solving the equation. For real. Professor Thorne felt a growing discomfort. He moved closer to the board, watching what Leo was writing. His eyes widened. The boy was right. Every step was correct, and not only that. He was using a more direct, more elegant method of solving it than Thorne himself had planned. It was a brilliant solution. Leo continued. He isolated the variables, applied the pharmacokinetic formulas he had memorized from that old book. He calculated the elimination rate, adjusted the volume of distribution. His hands worked quickly, but his reasoning was clear. There were no mistakes, No hesitation. It was like watching a conductor lead a symphony. Every movement had a purpose. When he reached the most complex part of the equation, Leo paused for a moment. He closed his eyes. He visualized the numbers in his mind. He did the calculations mentally. Then he opened his eyes and continued to write. He simplified the terms, cancelled out the variables that nullified each other, and arrived at the final result. And then he took a step back. The equation was solved. Completely. Perfectly. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. A homeless boy, barefoot and dirty, had just solved one of the most complex pharmacokinetics equations many of them had ever seen, and he had done it with unnerving ease. That's when a man stood up from the audience. He was an elderly gentleman with white hair, thin-rimmed glasses, wearing a sober suit. Professor Henry Wallace, one of the most respected names in pharmacology in the country. He walked to the stage, climbed the steps with the slow deliberation of someone absorbing every detail, and stood before the board. He analyzed every line, every number, every step. He did this in silence, with the concentration of someone who didn't want to make a mistake in judgment. Finally, he turned to the audience. His voice was firm but filled with emotion. The solution is correct, completely correct, and more than that. This young man found a more efficient path to the solution than I would have used. It's astounding. The audience erupted, but not in laughter this time. In applause, hesitant applause at first, as if people were still trying to process what had happened. Then stronger applause. Some students stood up, then more people. In a few seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding. Not just applauding the intellectual feat, but applauding the courage, applauding the comeback, applauding the shattering of expectations. Leo stood there on the stage, the chalk still in his hand. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't prepared for this. He had prepared to solve the equation. He hadn't prepared for what came after. Tears began to stream down his face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of validation, of finally being seen. But not everyone was happy about it. Professor Marcus Thorne was pale. His plan to humiliate the boy had backfired. Now he was the one who looked ridiculous. He was the one who had used a street kid as a joke. He was the one who had completely underestimated someone based on their appearance, and everyone there realized it. The looks of admiration for him had turned into looks of disapproval, of judgment. Marcus took a deep breath. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't just walk off the stage and leave it at that. He approached Leo, forced a smile onto his lips, and extended his hand. "Congratulations, kid. You surprised me, and I'll keep my promise. $100,000 is yours." Leo looked at the outstretched hand. Then he looked at the professor's face. He saw past the forced smile. He saw the discomfort. He saw the wounded arrogance. But he also saw something that perhaps Thorne himself hadn't yet realized. He saw the possibility of change. So he shook his hand. The audience applauded again. But Leo wasn't finished. He turned to the audience, took the microphone from the stand on the stage, and his voice echoed through the auditorium. It was a trembling voice at first, but it gained strength as he spoke. "My name is Leo. I'm 12 years old, and I've been living on the streets for 3 years. I taught myself to read. I never had formal schooling beyond the first few years of elementary school. Everything I know, I learned from books I found in the trash, discarded magazines, thrown out textbooks, and this knowledge has always been inside me. But no one ever wanted to listen, because when you're poor, when you're invisible, nobody believes you can know anything. Nobody believes you can have any worth." The auditorium was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people being confronted with an uncomfortable truth. Leo continued, "Today I solved this equation, but it wasn't just to win the prize. It was to prove that there are thousands like me, thousands of kids and young people who have talent, who have ability, but who will never get a chance because the world doesn't look at us. The world looks right through us, as if we were transparent, as if we don't exist." Some people in the audience started to cry. Others bowed their heads in shame. Leo wasn't accusing anyone specifically, he was just telling the truth. A truth that everyone there knew, but preferred to ignore. I don't want to be the exception. I don't want to be the inspirational story you'll tell at your dinner parties. I want this to be a wake-up call, for you to look around, for you to see who is being left behind, for you to understand that talent has no address, it has no social class, it has no appearance. Talent exists everywhere. The question is, who gets access to the doors to develop it? Leo put down the microphone and walked off the stage. He picked up his bag of cans and started walking toward the exit. But before he reached the door, several people surrounded him. Professors, students, journalists who were covering the event. Everyone wanted to talk to him. Everyone wanted to know more of his story. Everyone wanted to help. Miss Gloria and Jessica were among them. They had watched everything from a distance, working in the building's hallways. When they saw Leo being surrounded, they rushed to his side. Miss Gloria hugged him tightly, crying. Jessica held his hand, proud. They had always known this boy was special, and now the whole world was finding out too. A scholarship student named Kevin was there as well. He had watched everything with conflicting emotions. Kevin came from a poor family in the outer boroughs. He had gotten into the university through sheer effort. He worked during the day, studied at night. He was always tired but proud of his achievement. And now seeing this street kid receive all this attention, all this admiration, he felt something strange. It wasn't exactly envy, or maybe it was. It was complicated. He had fought so hard to get here. And this boy, with no diploma, no anything, had earned everyone's respect in minutes. Kevin knew it wasn't fair to feel this way, but he did. Meanwhile, in another part of the auditorium, a group of professors was talking in low voices. Among them was Professor Owen Lancaster, a middle-aged man with grey hair slicked back with gel and a perpetually serious expression. He was one of the university's most senior professors. He had influence. He had power. And he was not at all happy with what he had just witnessed. This is an absurdity, a circus. We can't allow this to set a precedent. The university has standards. It has criteria. We can't just enroll anyone who solves an equation. The other professors listened in silence. Some agreed, others weren't so sure. But they all knew that Lancaster wouldn't let this go easily. He was known for defending what he called academic excellence, with tooth and nail. And for him, excellence had more to do with credentials than with actual ability. At that moment, no one knew it yet, but a battle was beginning. A battle that would go far beyond Leo. A battle over who deserves opportunities, over who deserves to be seen, over who defines a person's worth. Leo, surrounded by people, felt overwhelmed. He wasn't used to so much attention. He just wanted to get out of there, go back to his spot under the awning, and process everything that had happened. But the symposium coordinator, Professor Helen Carter, a middle-aged woman with a maternal air, approached him. "Leo, I need you to come with me. Let's talk calmly. Let's see how we can help you." Leo hesitated, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw sincerity. He nodded. Miss Gloria and Jessica went with them, like silent guardians. They headed to an administrative office, away from the buzz of the auditorium. Meanwhile, the video of what had happened was starting to circulate. Several people had recorded it, and in a matter of hours, it would be all over social media. The story of the homeless boy who solved a complex equation and called out the systemic prejudice of society. It was the kind of content that goes viral. That sparks debate, that forces reactions. Professor Marcus Thorne was in his private office at the university, sitting behind his mahogany desk, his head in his hands. He knew he had made a mistake, a public mistake, a mistake that would tarnish his reputation. He had always prided himself on being respected, on being admired, and now he would be remembered as the arrogant professor who humiliated a child, as the man who judged by appearance, as someone who represented everything wrong with the system. But as he sat there reflecting, something began to change within him. It wasn't just shame, he felt. It was also a pang of real, genuine guilt. He began to question his own actions, his own beliefs. He had spent so many years building a bubble around himself, a bubble made of privilege and certainty, that he had forgotten to look outside. He had forgotten that there are people struggling, people with potential, people who just need a chance. Maybe it was too late to change completely, but maybe it wasn't too late to start. He picked up the phone and made a call to his lawyer. He instructed him to arrange the transfer of the $100,000 to Leo. But not just that, he also instructed him to look for ways to help, to make a difference, to repair the damage he had caused. Meanwhile, in the administrative office, Professor Carter was talking to Leo. She explained that the university wanted to offer him a special scholarship, student housing, a meal plan, psychological support, everything he would need to be able to study. Leo listened with wide eyes. It seemed too good to be true, and part of him was suspicious. But another part, the part that still believed in possibilities, desperately wanted to believe it was real. But I haven't even finished high school. How will I keep up with university classes? Professor Carter smiled. We'll do an assessment. We'll see what you already know, and we'll create a personalized plan for you. It won't be easy, but nothing in your life has been easy so far, and you made it here. So I believe you can do it. Leo felt the tears return, but this time he let them fall freely. Ms. Gloria and Jessica were also crying, holding each other. It was a moment of hope, of change, of a new beginning. But outside on campus the news was already spreading, and not all the reactions were positive. Professor Owen Lancaster was already organizing an emergency meeting of the university board. He was already preparing arguments against Leo's enrollment. He was already gathering allies. Because for him this wasn't about justice or opportunity. It was about maintaining the status quo. It was about protecting the system that had always favored him. The battle was just beginning, and Leo, without knowing it, had become the symbol of something much bigger than himself. He had become the representation of all the invisible talents, of all the silenced voices, of all the closed doors. And now those doors were being forced open, even if it was just a crack. But it was a start, and sometimes a start is all you need. 3 weeks had passed since that day in the auditorium. 3 weeks that had completely changed Leo's life. The video of the homeless boy solving the equation had gone viral in a way no one could have predicted. Millions of views, thousands of comments, stories in every major newspaper in the country. Leo had become a symbol, a phenomenon, and that brought both positive and negative consequences. Leo now lived in the university's student dorms. He had a small but clean room, a real bed with fresh-smelling sheets, a closet where he kept the new clothes he had been given, a desk with a lamp. For someone who had spent years sleeping under awnings, this was an unimaginable luxury. But adjusting wasn't easy. He wasn't used to walls around him. He wasn't used to a structured routine. He wasn't used to the constant attention, because attention was something he didn't lack. Wherever Leo went on campus, he was recognized. Students stopped to take pictures. Professors greeted him, some with genuine admiration, others with that patronizing tone that bothered him, as if he were a charity project, a trophy for social inclusion. Leo could tell the difference. He knew who really cared and who just wanted to feel good about themselves. The knowledge assessment the university gave Leo impressed everyone. He had mastered advanced concepts in math, physics, chemistry, and biology. His knowledge was uneven. It was true. There were gaps, areas he hadn't studied yet. But what he knew deeply. The committee of professors responsible for the assessment decided that Leo could take advanced courses in some areas while needing remedial help in others. A personalized plan was created. The first few weeks of classes were intense. Leo attended classes at different levels. In the morning, he had remedial classes in English and writing, areas where his gaps were most evident. In the afternoon, he participated in advanced seminars on pharmacokinetics and organic chemistry, where he surprised even the master's students with his observations and questions. It was an exhausting routine, but Leo absorbed everything with the same hunger for knowledge he had always had. In the pharmacokinetics classes, taught by Professor Helen Carter, Leo shone. He didn't just understand the concepts. He made connections that others didn't. He questioned assumptions. He proposed alternative solutions to complex problems. Professor Carter was genuinely impressed. She had seen many brilliant students in her career, but Leo had something special. It wasn't just intelligence. It was a way of thinking untainted by traditional academicism. It was pure creativity, but not all experiences were positive. In an introductory sociology class, taught by an associate of Owen Lancaster, Leo was put in an awkward position. The professor, seemingly without malice, but clearly influenced by behind the scenes, conversations asked Leo to explain to the class what it was like to live on the streets, as if his life experience were just a case study, as if he were an object of analysis and not a student like the others. Leo felt the humiliation burn, but he responded with dignity, briefly explaining his journey without going into intimate details. After class, several classmates approached him to apologize for the professor's insensitivity, but not everything was acceptance. The emergency meeting of the university board that Professor Owen Lancaster had called took place a week after the incident. He presented a series of arguments against Leo's special enrollment. He claimed a lack of precedent. He claimed it risked devaluing the institution's diplomas. He argued that, as impressive as the boy's feat was, exceptions couldn't be made based on a single moment. Professor Helen Carter countered firmly. She argued that the university had a social responsibility, that inclusion wasn't a favor, it was justice, that Leo represented thousands of talented young people who were being wasted by the system, that true academic excellence should be measured by the ability to identify and develop potential, not by certificates and credentials. The vote was close, but Leo was approved. By a small margin, but he was approved. Lancaster left the meeting visibly displeased, and since then he had become the main silent obstacle in Leo's journey at the university. He didn't do anything openly, but he schemed behind the scenes. He spread doubts. He questioned legitimacy. He tried to undermine the boy's credibility whenever possible. Leo felt it. He noticed the stares. He heard the whispers. But he tried not to let it affect him. There was something bigger at stake now. It wasn't just about him. It was about proving the system wrong. It was about paving the way for others. And others were coming, because one of the conditions Leo made for accepting the enrollment was that his story not be seen as an exception, but as a wake-up call. From that condition, the Invisible Talents Project was born, an initiative to identify children and teenagers from low-income communities, shelters, and the streets who showed academic potential. The idea was to offer scholarships, mentorship, and placement in special educational programs. And who was funding a large part of this project? Professor Marcus Thorne. He had become the largest individual contributor, not out of legal obligation, not due to external pressure, but because of a personal change. That day in the auditorium had stirred something deep within him. It had cracked the shell of arrogance he had built over the years. And what was emerging was someone different, someone who wanted to atone, someone who wanted to make a difference. Marcus and Leo had met a few times since then. The conversations were awkward at first. Marcus formally apologized. Leo accepted, but maintained a respectful distance. Trust was something built over time, but he recognized the effort. He recognized the attempt at change. And that was something. Marcus's transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a painful process of self-discovery and confronting his own flaws. He began to question everything, his superficial friendships based on status, his investments motivated solely by profit, his teaching style that prioritized academic elitism. Marcus started attending the Invisible Talents Project meetings, at first just as a distant funder, then as an active participant. He listened to the stories of the children and teenagers being identified. He saw the wasted potential. He saw the system failing repeatedly. And each story was like a mirror reflecting his own prejudice. One of these stories marked him deeply. It was about a 14-year-old girl named Amanda who lived in a shelter after her mother had faced severe mental health issues. Amanda had a brilliant mind for chemistry. She created experiments with materials found in the shelter. She studied from donated books. She dreamed of developing affordable drugs for neglected diseases. When Marcus met her and talked to her, he saw in her eyes the same determination he had seen in Leo's. And he realized how many Amandas there were across the country, how much potential was being wasted because the system only recognized those with the right last name, credentials and connections. Jessica also benefited from the project. She, who worked the night cleaning shift at the university, had dreamed of studying. But she never had the means. Now, with a scholarship from the Invisible Talents Project, she was taking a prep course for her college entrance exams. She wanted to study education. She wanted to become a teacher. She wanted to help other kids like Leo. She and Leo became very close. She was like the big sister he never had, someone he trusted, someone who understood where he came from. Ms. Gloria continued her cleaning job, but now with a different sparkle in her eyes. She saw Leo almost every day. She brought him homemade meals because she knew he still wasn't completely comfortable with the cafeteria food. And whenever she saw him, she felt immense motherly pride. The boy she had helped was changing the world, and she was a part of that story. Kevin, the scholarship student who had felt that mix of emotions on the day of the incident, was still struggling with his own feelings. He watched Leo receive all that attention, all that support, and couldn't help but compare. Kevin had fought so hard to get where he was. He worked hard, he studied hard, but no one wrote articles about him. No one treated him like a phenomenon. He was just another poor student trying to survive. One day, in the university hallway, Kevin and Leo crossed paths. They stood face to face for a moment. Kevin was just going to walk past, but something made him stop. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need to confront those feelings. "You're Leo, right? The boy genius." Leo caught the tone. It wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was loaded with something. Resentment, maybe. "I'm Leo, but I'm not a genius. I'm just someone who got lucky enough to be seen." Kevin gave a bitter smile. "Lucky? I've been working since I was 14. I've been studying for as long as I can remember, and no one's ever called me a genius. No one's ever made a special project for me. You solved one equation and became a celebrity. I solve equations every day and nobody cares." Leo looked at him intently. He understood perfectly what Kevin was feeling. Because he would have felt the same way if he were in his shoes. "You're right, it's not fair. None of this is fair. I didn't ask to be a symbol. I didn't ask for the attention. I just wanted a chance to study. And you deserve to have that attention too. You deserve to have support. The problem isn't you or me. The problem is the system that makes us compete for scraps while others have everything handed to them." Kevin was silent. He hadn't expected that response. He expected defensiveness, he expected arrogance, but he found empathy. He found understanding, and it completely disarmed him. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. It's just, it gets hard sometimes, you know?" Leo nodded. "I know, and for what it's worth, I admire you, because you did this on your own, without the spotlight, without the cameras, without a special project. You're stronger than I am." That touched Kevin deeply. For the first time, someone acknowledged his struggle, not with pity, but with respect. They talked for a while longer. They shared experiences. They discovered they had a lot in common, and from that uncomfortable encounter, an unlikely friendship was born. Kevin became one of Leo's biggest allies at the university. But as alliances formed, opposition also strengthened. Professor Owen Lancaster was not alone in his silent campaign. He had gathered a group of faculty and donors who shared his views. They met discreetly, always off campus, in expensive restaurants or private rooms. They discussed strategies. They planned ways to delegitimize Leo without looking like the villains of the story. Their strategy was subtle. They didn't attack Leo directly, but they questioned the methodology of the assessment he took. They suggested that maybe the questions had been leaked. They insinuated that maybe someone had helped him solve the equation that day. They never said it openly. But they planted the seeds of doubt in casual conversations, in offhand comments, in seemingly innocent questions, and those seeds began to sprout. Some students started to question, some professors started to doubt. The narrative was being slowly manipulated. Leo noticed. He felt the climate changing. He saw different looks. He heard veiled comments, and it hurt him. Not because he doubted himself, but because he knew he was fighting against something bigger than competence. He was fighting against deep-rooted prejudice. One night, Leo was in his dorm room, trying to study for a chemistry exam. But he couldn't concentrate. Thoughts about the whole situation constantly distracted him. That's when Jessica knocked on his door. She could tell something was wrong. She sat on the bed next to him and asked what was going on. Leo poured his heart out. He told her about the insinuations, about the doubts being spread, about the feeling that maybe he wasn't strong enough to handle it all. Jessica listened in silence. Then she took his hands and looked into his eyes. "Leo, you've already proven so much. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. What you did in that auditorium was real. Your knowledge is real. Your ability is real. And if there are people who would rather doubt you than accept their own ignorance and prejudice, that's their problem, not yours." Jessica's words brought comfort. But Leo knew he would have to do more than just exist. He would have to keep proving himself, continuously, exhaustively. Because for people like him, the margin for error was zero. One mistake, and it would all be used as evidence that he didn't deserve to be there. Meanwhile, the Invisible Talents Project was starting to bear fruit. Dozens of children and teenagers had been identified. Incredible stories were emerging. A 13-year-old boy from a housing project in Chicago with an extraordinary aptitude for math. A 15-year-old girl from a shelter in Detroit who wrote dense, mature spoken-word poems. A 16-year-old teenager from a rural community in Appalachia who had single-handedly developed an efficient irrigation system using recycled materials. All these stories validated what Leo had said that day. Talent has no address. It has no social class. The problem was never the absence of talent. It was always the absence of open doors. And now with the project, some of those doors were being kicked down. But this change was unsettling. It unsettled those with privilege. It unsettled those who benefited from the exclusionary system. And those people wouldn't stand by idly. The real battle was just beginning. Because inclusion isn't just about opening doors. It's also about confronting those who want to keep them shut. It's also about dismantling structures. It's also about questioning power. And Leo, even without choosing it, had become the face of this battle. He was on the front lines of something much bigger than himself. And he would have to decide if he had the strength to continue, if he had the courage not to give up, if he had the resilience to withstand the attacks that were still to come, because they were coming. Lancaster and his group were just waiting for the right moment, waiting for Leo to make any slip-up, any mistake, any falter. And when that happened, they would attack with everything they had. And they would try to destroy not just Leo, but everything he represented. The storm was gathering on the horizon, and Leo, a 12-year-old boy who just wanted to study, would have to learn to be more than smart. He would have to learn to be strategic. He would have to learn to fight, not with anger, but with wisdom. Because this was no longer just his story. It was the story of all the invisible ones, of all the discarded ones, of all those who never had a voice. And he couldn't fail. Because if he failed, he would prove what his opponents had always said. That people like him don't belong in places like this. That exceptionalism is a privilege of the few. That the system is fine just the way it is. But Leo wasn't going to fail. He wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to let his story be used as evidence against others like him. Because he knew the truth. And the truth was simple. He wasn't the exception. He was just the first one to be seen. And he would do everything to make sure he wasn't the last. The battle was just beginning, but Leo was ready, or at least he was trying to be. The attack came from where Leo least expected it. It wasn't a direct confrontation. It wasn't a public accusation. It was something far more calculated, far more cruel. One afternoon, as Leo was walking back from the library to his dorm, he found an envelope under his door. Inside were photocopies of pages from the pharmacokinetics book he had found in the trash years ago, and with them, an anonymous letter with a devastating accusation. The letter insinuated that Leo hadn't solved the equation on his own, that he had memorized solutions from that book, that the whole thing was nothing more than a well-executed fraud. Leo felt the floor drop out from under him. Not because of the accusation itself. He knew the truth. He knew he had solved that equation with genuine knowledge, but because of the maliciousness of the strategy, whoever had done this knew exactly where to strike. They knew Leo had no irrefutable way to prove he hadn't just memorized it. They knew that doubt, once planted, would grow like a weed. He ran to Jessica's room. He showed her the letter. She read it with a look of growing anger. "This is absurd. It's a setup. You need to show this to Professor Carter. You need to report it." But Leo hesitated. What if no one believed him? What if this was used to question not just his achievement, but the entire Invisible Talents project? What if his defense seemed like weakness? The doubts consumed him. Jessica saw the desperation in his eyes and hugged him tightly. "You're not alone. You never have been, and anyone who knows you knows the truth." The next day, Leo went to see Professor Carter. He showed her the letter. She was furious. Not at him, but at whoever had done this. She immediately called an emergency meeting with the board members who supported Leo. Marcus Thorne was there. When he saw the letter, his expression turned grim. He knew this kind of tactic. He had used similar methods in the past, in the corporate world, to discredit competitors. Seeing it used against Leo disgusted him. It disgusted him and shamed him for recognizing a part of himself in it. The meeting was tense. They discussed how to respond. Some thought they should ignore it, that giving it attention would legitimize it. Others thought they needed to confront it directly. Professor Carter proposed something different. "Let's have a public demonstration. Leo will solve equations live with no prior notice, with problems created on the spot by an independent committee. We'll put an end to any doubt." Leo agreed, not because he wanted to put himself on display again, but because he knew he had no choice. That night he went back to his dorm and couldn't sleep. He lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that was at stake. It wasn't just about him. It was about Jessica, who was studying for her college entrance exams. It was about Amanda and all the other kids in the project. It was about proving the system wrong. The pressure was suffocating. Kevin showed up at Leo's door in the middle of the night. He couldn't sleep either. He knew Leo was going through this alone and didn't want to leave him. They talked for hours. Kevin told stories about when he was just starting at the university, how he felt inadequate, how he thought he didn't deserve to be there. Leo realized they weren't so different after all. They both carried the weight of representation. They both felt they couldn't fail because their failure would be used against everyone who came after them. The week passed slowly. Leo tried to keep up with his studies, but anxiety consumed him. Jessica was always nearby, bringing him food, offering words of comfort. Miss Gloria visited every day with her meals and motherly hugs. Marcus sent messages of support, offering any kind of help. The support was real, but so was the fear. The demonstration was scheduled for the following week, in the same auditorium where it had all begun. The news spread quickly. The press was invited. Students, professors, and curious onlookers packed the space. Professor Owen Lancaster was there, sitting in the front rows with that neutral expression that hid his satisfaction. For him, this was an opportunity. If Leo failed, it would prove his point. If Leo succeeded, the doubt would still linger for some. The independent committee was made up of 3 professors from other universities, experts in pharmacology and applied mathematics. They prepared 3 complex problems, each more difficult than the last. Leo had no prior access, no time to prepare. He was thrown onto the center of the stage before hundreds of eyes with 3 equations on the board and the crushing pressure to prove, once again, that he was worthy. He took a deep breath. He closed his eyes for a moment. He blocked out the noise around him. He blocked out the tension. He blocked out everything except the numbers. And he began. The first problem involved enzyme kinetics. Leo wrote, calculated, adjusted. His fingers moved with precision. His mind processed at an incredible speed. He solved it in 15 minutes. The committee checked. Correct. The second problem was about pharmacodynamics, involving multiple variables and drug interactions. More complex, denser. Leo took longer. 30 minutes of intense calculations. Sweat dripped down his forehead. But when he finished again, it was correct. The audience began to murmur, impressed, admiring. The third problem was the hardest. It involved mathematical modeling of drug distribution in specific tissues, considering factors like blood perfusion, cell permeability, and protein binding. It was advanced graduate-level stuff. Some professors in the audience looked at the equation and doubted even they could solve it quickly. Leo stood before the board for a long moment. The silence was deafening. For an instant, Leo felt the weight of it all. He felt the pressure of every stare. He felt the fear of failure. He felt the crushing responsibility. But then he closed his eyes and remembered something. He remembered his parents, his father who worked to exhaustion but always smiled at him, his mother who cleaned the houses of the rich but never let him feel less for it. He remembered the night studying under overpasses, lit only by streetlights. He remembered the entire journey to get here, and he realized he had already proven enough. Not to others, to himself. When he opened his eyes, he was different, firmer, more confident, and he began. This time, it was different. Leo didn't just solve it. He explained each step out loud. He talked about the premises, the necessary simplifications, the mathematical approximations. He turned the solution into a lecture. Professors took out notebooks and started taking notes. Students recorded on their phones. Even the committee members were impressed with his teaching ability. Leo explained as if he were talking to friends. No arrogance, no showmanship, just sharing knowledge. He said things like, "Look, here we can simplify because this variable cancels out with that one." Or, "This step is a bit counterintuitive at first, but it makes sense when you think about the real dynamics of the system." It was fascinating to watch, not just for the intellectual capacity, but for the humility with which he shared it. In 40 minutes, he was done. It took the committee almost 10 minutes just to verify all the steps. And when they announced that it was correct, and that he had even used a more efficient method than they expected, the audience exploded in applause. But this time, it was different applause. It wasn't just admiration for the feat, it was respect. It was recognition that they were in the presence of something special, of someone who, despite all adversity, maintained his dignity and generosity. Leo left the stage exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, but he had done it. He had proven himself again. Jessica and Kevin ran to hug him. Miss Gloria was crying with pride in the back rows. Professor Carter was smiling through tears, and Marcus watched it all with a mix of admiration and sadness. Admiration for the boy. Sadness that he had to go through that he had to prove what should never have been questioned. But it wasn't over. Professor Owen Lancaster stood up and asked for the floor. His voice echoed through the auditorium. It was impressive, no doubt, but that doesn't change the fact that there are still questions about the legitimacy of his enrollment, about the precedents this sets, about the message we send by accepting someone without the necessary formal qualifications. The audience fell silent. Some agreed with Lancaster. Others were shocked by his insensitivity. That's when Kevin stood up. He hadn't planned to speak, but something inside him wouldn't let him stay quiet. He walked onto the stage, took the microphone, and faced Lancaster. "With all due respect, Professor, the formal qualifications you're talking about don't measure ability. They measure privilege, they measure access. I came from the outer boroughs. I worked my butt off to get here. And I know my diploma didn't make me smarter. It just gave me credibility. Leo has the intelligence. What he didn't have was the credibility, and you know why? Because the system is designed to keep people like him out. You're not defending excellence. You're defending exclusion." Kevin's words resonated. He continued, "And I'll tell you something, Leo. I was jealous of you. Jealous of the attention you got, but today I get it. You didn't ask for this attention. You just wanted to study, and you had to fight 10 times harder than any of us to prove you deserved it. That's not fair, but you did it, and I'm going to stand by you, because if they attack you, they attack all of us who came from nothing." The audience erupted in applause again. Lancaster turned red with anger, but there was no way for him to rebut without sounding even more callous. He sat down, defeated. But Leo knew it wasn't over. Lancaster was a proud man, and wounded pride is dangerous. In the following days, the story gained even more traction. Leo became not just a symbol of invisible talent, but also of resistance, of the fight against an unjust system. Invitations for interviews arrived daily, requests for lectures, sponsorship offers. Leo turned down most of them. He didn't want to be a celebrity, he wanted to be a student, but he accepted a few strategic engagements. He was invited to speak before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C. about education and inclusion. His speech was direct, no nonsense. He spoke about the millions of talented children being wasted, about the need for structural reforms, about collective responsibility. Some lawmakers listened with genuine attention, others with poorly disguised disdain. But the seed was being planted. During this trip to D.C., something important happened. Leo met other young people from different parts of the country who also had stories of overcoming adversity. One of them was Caleb, an 18-year-old from rural Mississippi who had developed a water purification system using local materials. Another was Grace, a 15-year-old girl from rural West Virginia who wrote powerful spoken-word poems about social issues and had won regional awards. Talking with them, Leo realized something fundamental. He wasn't an exception. He never was. The country was full of brilliant, creative, capable people. The problem was that the system didn't see them, didn't hear them, didn't value them. This realization strengthened him, because it meant his fight wasn't a solitary one. It meant there was an army of invisible talents waiting to be discovered, and the Invisible Talents Project was just the beginning. When he returned to New York, Leo was different, more mature, more strategic, more determined. The Invisible Talents Project grew exponentially. Dozens of companies and institutions began to support it. Public schools started implementing potential identification programs. Universities across the country created special quotas not just based on income, but also on life trajectory. It wasn't perfect. It was far from perfect, but it was a start, and starts matter. Jessica had been accepted into college. She would start her education degree next semester. Leo was happier about her news than he would have been about any personal achievement, because Jessica's victory proved that the movement was real, that it wasn't just about him, it was about everyone. Ms. Gloria continued to work, but now with recognition. The university created an award in her honor for employees who showed exceptional care for students. She cried when she received it, not for the award, but for the recognition that small gestures matter, that a meal offered with kindness can change a life. Marcus Thorne had completely transformed, not just in his actions, but in his essence. He started teaching free classes in low-income communities. He used his influence to pressure colleagues to do the same. He created a permanent scholarship fund. And every time he looked at Leo, he saw not just the boy he had humiliated. He saw the boy who had saved him from a life of superficiality and ego, saved him from dying without having made a real difference. One evening, Marcus sought out Leo on campus. He asked to talk. They walked through the university gardens, under the moonlit trees. Marcus spoke about his journey of change, about how hard it was to deconstruct years of internalized prejudice, about how grateful he was, even if it sounded strange to say it. Leo listened in silence, and when Marcus finished, he said something simple but profound. You don't have to thank me, you have to make it count, you have to use your privilege to open doors. Not to feel good about yourself, but because it's the right thing to do. And you need to understand that it will never be enough, because the system that created you and created people like Professor Lancaster isn't going to fall overnight. It will resist, it will fight back, and we need to be ready for that fight. Marcus nodded. He still had a lot to learn, but he was willing, and that in itself was rare. Leo returned to his room that night thinking about everything that had happened since that day in the auditorium. It had been intense, tiring, painful, but also transformative, not just for him but for everyone around him. The movement that started with a boy solving an equation had become something much bigger. It had become a real force for change. But Leo knew the battle wasn't over. He knew that Lancaster and others like him would keep trying to sabotage them. He knew he would have to keep proving himself, continuously, exhaustively, and that tired him. But it also strengthened him, because now he wasn't alone. He had allies, he had friends, he had a cause bigger than himself. And that made all the difference. 3 years had passed since that transformative day in the auditorium. Leo was now 15, but he seemed older in some ways and remained a child in others. His face had gained more defined features. His body had grown, but his eyes still carried that depth that came from someone who had seen and lived too much in too little time. He was a sophomore in the pharmacy program, with exceptional grades, scientific publications to his name, and the respect of professors and peers. The inclusion program, born from his demand, had expanded beyond what anyone could have imagined. Over 200 young people from vulnerable situations had been identified and were being supported at different stages of their education. Some were still in middle school, others in high school, and some, like Amanda, were already in college. The project had become a national benchmark, inspiring similar initiatives at other institutions across the country. Kevin was about to graduate and already had an offer for a master's program. The friendship between him and Leo had solidified into something fraternal, a brotherhood built not on blood, but on mutual understanding and respect. They spent hours talking about their projects, their dreams, their concerns for the future. Kevin planned to focus his research on access to medicine in underserved communities. Leo wanted to develop more efficient methods of drug delivery in the body, aiming for more effective and affordable treatments. Ms. Gloria had been promoted to General Coordinator of the support program for the included students. She now earned a decent salary, had managed to move into a better house with her children, and most importantly felt that her work had purpose. She saw a bit of Leo in every young person she helped, and in each of their successes, she felt a mother's pride. Professor Marcus Thorne continued to fund the program, but he had gone beyond that. He had transformed one of his properties into a study and support center for homeless youth, offering not only classes but also vocational workshops, psychological counseling, and social reintegration. His personal transformation was genuine and profound. He and Leo developed a relationship of mutual respect, meeting regularly to discuss the direction of the program and education in general. But Professor Owen Lancaster remained an obstacle. His opposition to the program had never completely ceased. He had become more subtle, more calculating in his attacks. He no longer attacked Leo directly, but undermined the program in other ways. He questioned every new admission, demanded increasingly rigorous evaluations, and created unnecessary bureaucracy that delayed processes. It was during a university board meeting that the situation reached a breaking point. Lancaster presented a lengthy report, arguing that the program was lowering the university's academic standards, that the dropout rates among beneficiaries were too high, that the investment wasn't worth it. His statistics were carefully selected to show only the negative aspects, completely ignoring the successes. Leo was present at that meeting, invited as a representative of the beneficiary students. He listened to Lancaster's entire speech in silence, feeling anger rise in his chest, but maintaining his composure. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up calmly. "Professor Lancaster," Leo began, his voice firm and clear, "you are right on some points. Yes, we have dropout rates. Yes, some young people can't keep up. But do you know why? Because we are taking people who have been abandoned by the education system for years, who carry deep traumas, who have never even had a stable environment to study, and we expect them to be at the same level as those who have had every advantage since birth in just a few months." He paused, looking into Lancaster's eyes. "What's impressive isn't how many drop out, Professor. What's impressive is how many succeed. How many, against all odds, overcome barriers you can't even imagine. Amanda, who is sitting right there, used to work 12 hours a day cleaning houses and still managed to get exemplary grades. Kevin, who used to wake up at 4 in the morning to get here, is one of the top students in his class. Are these the failures you're talking about?" Lancaster tried to interrupt, but Leo continued, "And you know what bothers me most about your report, Professor? It's that you measure success only by academic metrics, but you forget that we are changing lives. Every young person who enters this program, even if they don't finish their degree, goes back to their community with knowledge, with dignity, with the certainty that they are capable. And that creates ripples, Professor. It creates changes that don't fit into your statistics. The silence in the room was absolute. Other board members looked between Leo and Lancaster, clearly impressed by the young student's maturity and passion. It was then that the university president, a middle-aged woman with an intelligent and decisive gaze, spoke up. "Professor Lancaster," she said, "I respect your concerns, but I have to agree with Leo. This program is fulfilling a fundamental social role in addition to its academic one, and the success numbers are indeed impressive when properly contextualized. The proposal for expansion is approved." Lancaster turned red with anger, but he could do nothing. He had been defeated publicly, and this time with no room for appeal. He stood up and left the room, making his displeasure clear. After the meeting, the president called Leo for a private conversation. "I liked how you defended yourself," she said. "Firm, but respectful. You have a future in leadership, you know." Leo smiled shyly. "I just want to make sure others get the chances I had." "And they will," the president assured him. "Actually, I have a proposal. In 2 weeks, we have the annual Pharmacology Symposium. It's in the same auditorium where it all started for you. Would you like to give the closing keynote? Nothing too technical, just your story, your reflections, on education, opportunity, and transformation." Leo felt a tightness in his chest to return to that auditorium 3 years later in a completely different way. It was too symbolic to be a coincidence. He accepted. The 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Leo wrote and rewrote his speech dozens of times. He wanted it to be perfect, to touch people, to make a difference. Professor Carter helped him deal with the anxiety that grew as the day approached. Ms. Gloria gave him confidence, reminding him of the journey he had taken. Kevin joked that he already had experience, giving viral speeches, which drew laughter and eased some of the tension. When the day finally arrived, Leo woke up early, just like in the old days. But now he woke up in a comfortable room, with clean clothes waiting for him, with breakfast guaranteed. He dressed carefully, in a simple but elegant outfit that Miss Gloria had helped him choose. He looked at himself in the mirror, and for a moment didn't recognize the person he saw. Where was the barefoot, dirty boy? He was there, Leo realized. He would always be there, a fundamental part of who he was, but no longer defining his entire being. The auditorium was packed when Leo arrived. Students, professors, officials, journalists, and many of the young people benefiting from the program. Amanda was in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Kevin sat beside her, smiling encouragingly. Miss Gloria was further back, holding a handkerchief, already prepared for tears. Professor Thorne was also present, sitting discreetly in a corner, watching everything with restrained emotion. And there in the back, Leo saw Professor Lancaster. He had come despite everything. Their eyes met for a moment, and what the boy saw there surprised him. It wasn't anger or contempt. It was something close to resignation, perhaps even a touch of reluctant admiration. The president introduced Leo, summarizing his journey in an emotional way. When she called his name, the auditorium erupted in applause. Leo walked onto the stage, feeling his legs tremble slightly. He stopped in front of the same blackboard where 3 years earlier he had solved the equation that would change his life. He picked up the chalk, as he had done on that distant day, and wrote a simple but powerful sentence. "Talent has no address or appearance." He turned to the audience and began to speak. "The last time I was on this stage," he said, "I was invisible, a homeless kid, dirty, barefoot, seen as less than nothing by most of the people in this room. Today I return here, not because I'm special, not because I'm a genius, but because someone gave me a chance. And that is the difference between dying invisible and living with purpose." He paused, letting the words resonate. "This sentence I wrote on the board is not a celebration of my story. It's an indictment of how many stories like mine are wasted every single day. How many talents die before they are discovered. How many brilliant minds rot on the streets, in the projects, in the places society chooses to ignore." Leo began to walk across the stage, gesturing with growing passion. "In the last 3 years, I've learned a lot. I've learned advanced pharmacokinetics, organic chemistry, molecular biology. But I've also learned about humanity, about empathy, about social responsibility. I've learned that true intelligence isn't about solving complex equations. It's about recognizing the humanity in others, about extending a hand to those in need, about using your privilege and resources to create doors where there were only walls. He looked directly at Professor Thorne. I learned that people can change, that mistakes don't define who we are forever, that there is courage in transformation and strength in admitting when we are wrong. Then he looked to where Lancaster was sitting. And I also learned that resistance is natural. That change is scary because it threatens established structures, hard-won comforts. But I've learned that these changes are necessary and inevitable. The question isn't if they will happen, but what side of history we want to be on when they do. He turned back to the sentence on the board. "This university saved me," Leo said, his voice now thick with emotion. But it wasn't the university as a physical institution. It was the people. Ms. Gloria, who fed me when I was hungry. Kevin, who became my brother. Professor Carter, who taught me that it's okay not to be okay. Professor Thorne, who had the humility to reconsider his actions. And so many others who believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Tears began to stream down the faces of many in the audience. Leo's eyes were also moist, but he continued. So my message today isn't about individual overcoming. It's not about how a poor kid made it in life. It's about structure. It's about the system. It's about how we, as a society, need to stop waiting for talent to come to us and start going to where it is. We need to stop celebrating exceptions and start creating rules that make those exceptions unnecessary. He took his final pause, looking at every corner of the auditorium. The problem was never the absence of talent, Leo concluded, his voice echoing clear and strong. It was the absence of open doors. It's in our hands to change that, not tomorrow, not in the distant future, now. Each of us, with the tools and resources we have, can be the open door in someone's life. And when we do that, when we truly do that, we will discover that the world is full of Leos just waiting for a chance to shine. The silence that followed was brief, quickly replaced by a standing ovation. People were crying openly, hugging each other, applauding with fervor. Leo remained on stage looking at it all, feeling a mixture of gratitude, hope, and responsibility. When the applause finally began to die down, Leo walked off the stage. He was immediately surrounded by people wanting to congratulate him, take pictures, express their admiration. But his eyes were searching for someone specific. He found Ms. Gloria, who was crying her eyes out. They hugged in silence, no words needed. Everything that needed to be said was in that hug that lasted for long seconds. Then it was Kevin's turn, who shook Leo's hand, turning the gesture into a hug, whispering, "You did it, brother, you really did it." Amanda was there too, smiling through her tears, saying he had inspired her never to give up. Professor Carter waved from a distance, proud to see her student not just surviving, but thriving. And then Leo saw Professor Thorne approaching. The two faced each other for a moment, their entire history present in that look. Thorne extended his hand but then opened it for a hug. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me the chance to be a better person." Leo returned the hug. "Thank you for taking that chance." As he left the auditorium that night, Leo looked back one last time. That place had been the scene of his humiliation and his redemption, of his pain and his transformation. Now it was also the scene of his promise to keep fighting, to keep being the open door for others. He walked through the campus, watching students talking, laughing, living their lives. He thought of all the young people who, at that very moment, were sleeping under awnings, digging through trash to survive, dreaming of opportunities that seemed impossible. He thought that each of them had a story, a potential, a life that deserved to be lived to the fullest, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would dedicate his life to ensuring that those young people had the chances he had. It was no longer about him. Maybe it never had been. It was about all of them. It would always be about all of them. Leo looked up at the starry New York sky, so different from the nights when he looked at those same stars from the cold ground of the street, and he smiled. his story was just beginning. And it would be a story of open doors, of outstretched hands, of talents finally recognized. Because talent, as he had written on the board, has no address or appearance, it just needs a chance to shine. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Leo's story touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, struggle, and transformation, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul and making us reflect on who we are and what kind of world we want to build. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and touch your soul.